Well, welcome in, everyone. We have our special USFL 2022 draft post show. How's everyone doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited about the players that were picked. I'm excited about the teams that I've now decided to follow, and I'm excited to be back here.
Evan, how are you doing? Evan, we have Kyle and Evan, both from CFL and Xfl News Hub. Evan's joining us from Hawaii. How are you doing, Evan?
Yeah, man, doing pretty good. Spent the past 2 days really just studying the USFL draft, and I'm just excited to go over all these player selections, guys that we do know a lot about, guys that we don't know much about, and kind of everything in between. So yeah, just ready to dive in.
It's going to be exciting. We have a big show coming up on Friday this week. We're going to do our post show today. On Friday this week, we're going to have Dave Naylor from CFL coming back on. I want to get his thoughts on the kind of the USFL, CFL, right? We had a lot of guys jumping down to be part of the USFL. So we're going to have Dave Naylor on Friday. We're also going to have AJ Jackie back from the Red Blacks on, and then our own Jay Noakes talking about the big XFL NFL partnership. I also have a Calgary Stampeders player joining us. Surprise, I'll post tomorrow online. So it should be a good show Friday. So if you enjoyed today, please like and subscribe and check back Friday morning as well. So what did everyone think? I guess, Evan, first off, and we'll go team by teams here in a little bit. General thoughts, winners and losers of the USFL 2022 draft.
Yeah, so I definitely think the clear winner was the Bandits. I'll get into the reasons why later on, but Jordan Teamu at second overall was obviously, that was just a great pick. I think we all like that here. But then there were some picks further down the line that kind of really solidified it for me, and I definitely think that they knew what they were doing. Todd Haley did a great job, I think, assembling that, and everybody else that was involved. And then I think kind of a sleeper team. I think Kyle might get into this a bit later, but the Breakers, they had a few selections too that were, I would say pretty good. There's a lot of potential there. But then the team that I think, maybe didn't have such a great draft was probably the Michigan Panthers. Definitely felt like a few of their selections, could have been better. They could have spent their picks on, players that were just kind of, I guess I had a higher grade on. Obviously they went in a different direction, and we'll see how that pans out come April.
Yeah, I was surprised with that. We were talking beforehand. We'll get into the old Shea Patterson going number one of it all. Kyle was on here yesterday. We had a lot of prognostications about, who was going to go what. Ended up Shea Patterson number one. We had Teamu number two, and then Brian Scott number three. Kyle, general thoughts for you of the show?
Of the yesterday show, or
of the draft, where everyone ended up.
I'm happy. The guys I wanted to see drafted got drafted. None of my guys got drafted, but I'm gonna hopefully they get signed. Got a lot of talent I'm representing. But gosh, I don't know how I'm not gonna either be with the Stars or Bandits because of how well they really picked. I'm not surprised that I'm not surprised. And we'll probably hound the Michigan later, but I'm not surprised at them at all. The one thing I wanted someone else to get Turpin. I don't want to root for the Generals. I wanted someone else to get Turpin. I'm happy he got drafted, but come on now.
It's good. Yeah, I will say, and I think slam dunk in the bucket, my new team is going to be the Philadelphia Stars. I think once we made a lot of made less of the Ronald McDonald of it all with the uniforms and everything. I think seeing Brian Scott, friend of the show, going number 3 to them with Bart Andrus, they have that familiarity from the spring league. Obviously we have Matt Mangle joining, friend of the show as well. He was on the Alouettes practice squad last year. Buck Howard, a lot of spring league guys on there. I think the Stars are kind of rebuilding that. USFL News on Twitter said it's basically the Generals of the 2022 spring league season. The Stars are going back again. Evan, what do you think about the Stars taking Brian Scott at number 3?
I thought that was a great pick. There were some rumors going around the morning of the draft that Brian Scott was going to be, a top selection, probably, within the top 5. And I think this is a good shot for him because, I've been rooting for him for a long time. He's a friend of us and he's supported our work, but, he did a lot in the spring league. It was obvious for a while that the USFL was trying to get some guys from the spring league, and Brian Scott was kind of the, I don't know how you put it, maybe poster child for that. He did very well there. He's had a few NFL workouts. Just a great person as much as he is a player. And I'm really excited for him because, he hasn't been, in the XFL or the AAF or anything like that. So we haven't really gotten a chance to see his full potential yet. So yeah, I think he's going to be great. And I think that was a great pick by them.
What do they call him? The Aaron Rodgers of the D3, right? Is that what they call him, right?
Yeah.
Big arm, fast, mobile. Kyle, have you tracked Brian Scott through any of the spring league iterations before now?
No.
Well, this is good. I mean, like I said, he is really the poster boy for the spring football non-XFL. I think this is a good signing. I think this is someone that's still young. I will still remember messaging with Brian Scott and letting him know that the XFL was not coming back till 2023. And I think the shock in his responses at that point, of wanting to play right now, wanting to be able to be on the field. I think this is a good fit. Obviously, he has, familiarity with Brian Woods and kind of the rest of the guys there. I think he is going to helm them well. Losers of the draft, who were we saying before? Michigan Panthers. Evan, can you talk me through why you think Michigan did not do as well as maybe we anticipated with the first number overall draft pick?
Yeah, well, Shea Patterson at number 1 was definitely a surprise for me. To be honest, I wasn't even aware that he was in the draft pool. Obviously, they said that, there was going to be some guys that were more surprising than others. I think we knew that Brian Scott was there. We knew Te'amu was there, the morning of. But Shea Patterson was definitely a surprise. I knew he was up in Montreal recently, and I guess, he requested his release to come play in the USFL, but we didn't know that until the time. And then, of course, he was picked number 1 overall. Nothing against Shea Patterson. I do think that he has a future ahead of him. And again, this will be a great chance for him to, display his talent. He's played at Michigan. He has that Power 5 experience. Michigan's, a big college football program. It's a lot different than somewhere like Brian Scott played at Occidental. So I think it's not a terrible selection. Like, I do think he will be a good quarterback, but when you have a guy like Jordan Te'amu on the board who had such a good showing with the Battlehawks in the XFL in 2020, I think it's just kind of hard to pass that up. And, I was on Twitter maybe a few hours before the draft, and everybody was kind of saying, Te'amu's going to go number 1, Te'amu to the Panthers. I might have even seen like a Jordan Te'amu, Photoshop in the Panthers uniform.
Wow.
So I think, there might be some fans that are disappointed. And when you have a young team like that, and there's just kind of that one guy that's like right there that, he is kind of I don't know if he's the poster boy of XFL quarterbacks now, but, now that he is in the USFL, I think Te'amu is that kind of guy. I think he will be. So the fact that he didn't go number 1 overall, it was very surprising. Nothing against Shea Patterson. Again, I think he has a good future and a good shot here, but I think Jeff Fisher might regret that one, passing up on Te'amu down the line.
Yeah, Kyle, we had prognosticated yesterday. I think they had said that Shea had just gotten released out of his contract in Montreal. What do you think of this pick? I think you were negative on it as well. I was surprised before we got on the show.
Again, it's nothing against Shea. I don't like. To me, the first round, if you're picking a quarterback, you want a guy that has proven on some capacity that they can lead a team. I haven't really seen that with Shea. I've seen that more with Te'amu. You've seen what makes the Patterson pick, like, you can pick a Patterson. I'll pick a pair of Pattersons, like pickled peppers. But what really makes it worse for me is the Paxton Lynch pick. That, I think, if you're gonna go Patterson, all right, cool, get a solid backup. Like, get a solid backup, because they're probably gonna want to work with Patterson to make him the guy. But what happens if either A, he's not, or B, he gets hurt? Who you gonna turn to Paxton Lynch? Like, I just think it's a weird and not that great pairing.
Is it just because of him seemingly being washed up now, right? Having gone up to the CFL, not succeeded up there. I mean, he was on the CFL contract until this week. I mean, when that came out last night, I was off at the Kraken game, and it really was like the Royal Rumble. It was like, by God, that's Paxton Lynch's music coming out. I mean, it really was. It felt surprising. I think we all thought, well, maybe the supplemental draft here, maybe in March that'll come about. I just don't think anyone, the same with the Shea, taking these two so quick after being released from their CFL contracts, it just was surprising. Why are we so down on Paxton Lynch, Evan?
I think with Paxton Lynch, it's interesting, right? Because I remember when he signed with Saskatchewan last year, and it was kind of like, well, is he actually going to do something? Is he really going to have an opportunity, or is this more of a camp body type thing? And it definitely turned out to be the camp body type thing, because I'm pretty sure he was the 4th string quarterback, up there in the CFL after being a first-round draft pick in the NFL. So pretty steep fall off there. And like Kyle was mentioning, a quarterback battle between Shea Patterson and Paxton Lynch. I'm not sure if that's something fans exactly want to see, because it's not going to give them hope. I'll admit Paxton Lynch, for entertainment value and the purpose of entertainment, is great, because everybody knows who Paxton Lynch is. If you followed football in the past, 5 or 6 years, I mean, none of my friends really are following the USFL, but when I sent them the thing of Paxton Lynch, they're like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. So I guess it is good for maybe getting some fans to look at the team. But in terms of actual on-field performance, I don't think a guy like Paxton Lynch, is going to really have a shot. And he's not. It's sad for me to say that he's probably not going to be a capable backup, and he's probably going to lose the job to Shea Patterson, because Shea Patterson was the number 1 overall pick. I think they're pretty sold on him. But yeah, it's just interesting. Like Kyle said again, I think if you want a quarterback as a backup, you want to get one that has experience of leading a team and things like that. Paxton Lynch has just kind of been an interesting story to follow over the years, but in terms of actual play on the football field, I don't know about that.
It's interesting. We have, and Sam, I see you here. I think we're going to bring Sam on here as well from CFL News Hub. Mike Mitchell here highlighted comment: the Shea Patterson era is over before it even started. I mean, is Mike Mitchell that high on Paxton Lynch? Is there something that we should know?
I will say this about Paxton Lynch. And you can make the argument for a lot of other guys. If they build up Paxton Lynch's confidence, if they build him up to get that swagger that he never really got going in the NFL, let alone the CFL, I think he'll be fine. Because it's hard to follow up Peyton Manning. It really is. He had to do that. That's what was asked of him. He couldn't. Because who could? And I don't think he ever got that swagger back. And you look at Shea Patterson, kind of the same thing. Like, he was in a quarterback battle, quote unquote battle, with Patrick Mahomes. Like, I don't really think, as much as you get these guys that, like, I hope for their sake that they can rebound, but I don't know if I necessarily see it. I don't know. I'm not a big believer in Jeff Fisher. I don't know if he's the guy, the quarterback guru, that's going to help these guys find their former glory, or even find a glory that they like. I don't know if he's the one that you go to for that.
We're welcome back Sam as well to the show. Sam joined us yesterday for our pre-show. Sam, what are your overall kind of high-level thoughts how the USFL draft panned out?
I liked a lot of the things that several teams did. I thought it was quite the shock to see Shea Patterson go first overall. I thought it was going to be Te'amu, like we spoke about yesterday. But I think him going to Tampa Bay under Todd Haley will be a huge win for Te'amu himself. I liked the fact that Andrews went out and got guys that he was familiar with in Scott and Cookus, as well as Darnell. Man, I'm spacing his last name at the moment, but the running back from the Spring League as well. He's got 3 guys that are going to be key contributors to his offense that already know his scheme, and that's going to be a huge advantage going forward in 2022, especially being that he's trying to install a scheme when nobody on the team outside of those 3 knows it. I thought it was interesting to see an MLS player be drafted at kicker. Other than that, I'll let you guys toss it around and see what you got to say.
I just wanted to point out on this USFL, on the Tampa Bay, the official Tampa Bay roster, we have 2 misspellings. We have Bandits, we have B-A-N-I-T, and then Jordan Te'amu suddenly has an N on the end of his name. So I just wanted to point that out. This is from the official USFL. The Bandits are surprising. Todd Haley with Te'amu really touted. I think that really would have been. It's just surprising to me that they ended up going with a non-XFL guy to be that number 1 pick. I think Shea is going to get a lot of publicity, right, for being kind of I'm the number 1 pick. I mean, I already saw he had photos with Ed Hartman and everybody else at the draft that way. Did you guys As far as I can tell, everything went pretty smoothly last night. I mean, it seemed like picks were released in a reasonable time. I mean, Evan, were you following this real time, being a little earlier time zones than we were? I was ended up being out by the later ends of this draft.
Yeah, so I was up for most of the draft. I did miss a bit of it. But the Bandits, they had a great draft. We were talking about Jordan Ta'amu going number 1. But they definitely had a few other picks too that I think were great, especially in the receiver room. Eli Rogers is a guy I know they picked up. He has experience with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think he works out with Teddy Bridgewater. Another Broncos quarterback. Yeah, that was a theme last night. But no, they had quite a few good picks. Again, in the receiver room, I'm trying to think of who else. They had Jordan Lasley, who spent time with the Baltimore Ravens. They just really kind of hit it out of the park. And then John Franklin too is the last guy that I want to mention from that. He was on the Netflix show Last Chance U at East Mississippi Community College. He is he's a very versatile guy. He's been all over the field. He's played quarterback, receiver in the NFL. I think the one play that he came in on was like a run. I'm sure he can probably play defense too, like corner. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they use him too. Very just interesting draft class there. And I'm very excited for them. That whole thing to me was just very fun. But then generally speaking, the entire draft, I was able to watch most of it real time. Towards the end, I kind of skipped the cornerback section because I went to go do some other stuff, and then I came back for the second round of quarterbacks, which I'm glad I'm glad I didn't miss, and we'll get into that later. But overall, I thought they did a pretty decent job of executing it. Again, I would have preferred if they had like an actual live stream on TV that I could have watched. But they did a good job with the graphics and everything like that, and I think it definitely could have gone a lot worse. So I'll give them credit. The media team stayed up to date, even if there were a few misspellings and miscues. I really can't complain for a new league.
Kyle, what do we think here? Lots been made. We have the Stallions, right? Generals inaugural game, a lot of promotions for that. Alex McGow, I don't know him, right? I mean, he was selected by the Seahawks. So I should have a little familiarity there. We have these guys, and then Ben Holmes kind of leading. We have this big inaugural game, the simulcast. Was that a mistake that we don't have more recognizable, marketable guys in those preliminary spots there?
I don't know if it's a mistake. I mean, first of all, big shout out to Kavontae Turpin. I love him. He's a great receiver. He's going to explode, and it's going to be great. I don't like the Generals, but I'm going to root for him that he gets a bajillion yards. I don't really think it mattered in terms of like who they put first on the docket. I think no matter what, we're going to be sitting here going, oh, I wonder who that is for every team. So the goal of any league is to appeal to the general audience. I think the general audience doesn't know a lot of the guys that we know. So no matter who they put, I think the reason they put the Generals is because that's one of the most well-known teams. And then the Stallions because a team, Birmingham, maybe.
Yeah. Sam, thoughts on that? Thoughts on the inaugural game here? We have two of the lesser-known quarterbacks here, Hellman.
They might be lesser known as far as like household names, but you got to figure that both of them come from previous leagues. So I feel like they're going to bring fans to the stands regardless, especially with Brad Holmes. I wasn't too familiar with him when he was selected to begin with, but if I'm not mistaken, he was in the indoor football league and was actually a relatively big star for them. So I think he'll garner quite a bit of attention from their fan base. So I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing in the world. They probably would have liked to see a battle between, Shea Patterson and Jordan Ta'amu or Ta'amu and Brian Scott. But at the end of the day, I don't think this is necessarily the worst thing to happen.
It's just crazy. I mean, to think, that you could have Brian Scott on one side of the ball, and then you could have Jordan Ta'amu on the other side, kicking off the USFL. I mean, and I know that we're the hardcore of the hardcore following this, but just that's a lot of history there going back and like all these different leagues and all these different springs. It would have been exciting. It's a lot of possibilities. It really does feel like fantasy booking. And it feels like a lot of these guys that we've seen in various other forms, amalgamations now have all come together in this league. I do think that's exciting. I mean, I think that spring football definitely has that place where it's almost like these all-star games, right? Where Kyle has guys from FCF that he's tracked, right? We didn't have Pinto, right? David Pinto didn't show up. But we have a lot, or Pindell, right? Pindell. But we have a lot of, these guys showing up that have been in various forms, even like Matt Mangle that was in the Alouettes practice squad last year. What are we thinking? Big swings and misses. I'll let Kyle go first. Kind of anyone that you were questionable that ended up getting drafted, maybe instead of someone else.
I think the obvious answer is Shea Patterson over Jordan Te'amu.
Yeah,
I think like that's the big one right there. I mean, what was the order of the wide receiver draft? Because in my personal opinion, unless scheme played into it, which it might have, I don't see why you don't get Kavonte Turpin in like because he wasn't drafted until the second round of wide receivers.
Yeah. So Victor Bolden, number 1 here. We have Isaiah
7th. Oh, stop, because he's fast. He's got great hands. He's agile as heck. And he goes in the 7th of the first round of wide receivers. I would have taken him. I would have, if I'm the, oh, you know what? If I'm the Bandits, I would have paired him easily with Te'amu. That would have been deadly. Big miss. I would have. Not even like on. He wasn't even drafted. I think Ladarius Galloway.
Yep.
Dude rocked the spring league. Dude rocked the FCF. Dude was starting to rock the European League of Football, but he joined later in the season. I'm a bit surprised he didn't go.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it certainly was the more high profile last night with the quarterbacks. I mean, I think they did a good job with the wide receiver rounds today, right? Kind of garnering insight. It certainly feels like the anticipation and excitement that was going on last night certainly wavered during the day today. Sam, any thoughts on day 2 of the draft today? Probably having a little bit lackluster, even though it had some still high profile position players.
Yeah, I think there was. I mean, it left a little bit to be desired, but at the same time, it was rounds 13 through 35 of the draft. I mean, at that point, most of the excitement was gone, but at the same point, I thought there were some interesting things that came out. Like I said before, the MLS player, I believe his name's Brandon Audrey, that was drafted to play kicker. I thought that was kind of interesting. I thought it was interesting to see that 3 teams didn't draft a long snapper. I thought it was interesting that there was also several teams that didn't opt to draft both a kicker and a punter. But like you said, we're the few when it comes to the USFL. We're the people who are going to be following every little crumb of information that comes out. So of course we're looking at things like that. But I don't necessarily know that the casual fan was watching past round 12 anyway.
We have a Van, a listener, longtime listener, Van. Different coaching staffs have individual schemes. I mean, obviously, coming about that, this is kind of fantasy booking here. It was just curious, after all these unknown names, all this fantasy booking that we had the last couple of weeks to see where everyone landed. I did think it was surprising. Yeah, he says they're drafting the players to fit those schemes weighs greatly on the selections. Thoughts about, we had certain teams not take a punter and a kicker, right? Presumably we're going to get that in the supplemental draft right in March. Any interesting things about that you guys had?
Oh, it's just a slight against special teams.
Well, right. I mean,
I agree.
Certainly interesting that way with that. I thought that, having Matt Mangle have another shot, it is interesting that special teams, it's like the last couple draft selections on the last day, it really gets no respect at all. The special teams does in any of the football leagues. They've said that, right, 98% of the NFL rules are going to be carried over here to the USFL. Do you guys anticipate any tweaks with any of the kickoffs or any of the other rules like the XFL?
I definitely expect them to do something with it. I think the stats show that kickoffs are just simply too dangerous when it comes to the percentage of injuries that happen on kickoffs versus the regular play. I think it's something like 3 times more injuries on kickoffs versus an average offensive or defensive play. With something like that, especially in a league like this that you're carrying a smaller roster, I think it would be smart for them to approach it in a different manner. Whatever that may be to protect player safety. I'm not quite sure how they would go about tweaking it, but I think they should definitely look at something else.
Kyle, you had a comment too?
Oh, no, I didn't.
We have Matt Colburn here, right? He was another spring league guy. If you follow TSL the last year and a half, you really got a lot of good surprises here, a lot of little good tidbits going on in this. Evan, we were talking before we got on, not all of these players are known to the casual audience, right? Evan spent time out at Hub this year covering some of the players, and that's how you know a lot of these guys. Thoughts on where they were getting some of these players from when they weren't from Hub? I kind of rehashed the conversation we had before we started recording.
Yeah, there was a tweet that went out today that said about 20% of the players came from the Hub camps, so about 50 of them. The rest, I think, are honestly just kind of a combination. There was a few guys. I think the other big pool was kind of like the Spring League. We talked about that, and before the season, it was kind of known that a lot of players were going to come from the Spring League. There were a few fan-controlled football guys, maybe not as many as I would have liked to see. Same goes for Europe, and then. Other than that, I guess there was a few guys that had indoor experience too. We talked about, Ben Holmes, who apparently had a good showing in the indoor football league, although I knew him because I saw him on a spring league roster at one point. I don't know if he actually played. Just kind of an interesting situation there. But I do think, they did go far and wide to find talent because some of these guys that were getting drafted, the schools that they were coming from were very small. And of course, that's a good thing. But, some of these guys, to me, it seemed like their pro experience was limited to practices and workouts as opposed to, actual on-field play. So I think for a few of these guys, this is going to be like their first true pro opportunity. And I guess it was kind of the same like that in the XFL because they were bringing in guys that had, been in the NFL but were on a practice squad for the entire time. So they never actually, took the field. Maybe they did in the preseason, but some of them not even that. So I think it'll be interesting again to see like who can really make a name for themselves in the USFL. Whether they go on to the NFL after that or not. I think it'll just be interesting to see like, in the XFL, how certain guys, kind of developed a following like Taylor Heineke, even though he didn't play, Donald Parham, a few of those other guys. So I'm just excited to see what happens, to be honest there.
Kyle, question from Richard. How would you rate the draft?
Out of 10, I'd give it an 8. I think there's a lot of talent in there. It loses points because there's no pizzazz. There was nothing that like makes a draft worth following. It was just all online, updating Twitter, going to certain websites like that. But in terms of who was taken, like a lot of the teams look pretty well rounded. A lot of there's some excitement there. I think it was unique enough to generate some interest in terms of the position specific rounds. And I think it was, I'm like, it makes you interested into, who else they're going to take in the supplemental draft.
Yeah, I think that's going to be interesting too. I'm curious if do we lose any of these players, right? It really is such a thin roster. We're bringing in people, right? Is there going to be a lot of room for like roster positions and roster bowers? Richard says, I think the Tampa, Houston, Michigan, and Philadelphia should get A for their draft picks. Questions. One team that hasn't been talked about a lot yet is Pittsburgh the Maulers. I'm without going back through there. I can't even remember who their quarterback is. Thoughts on the Maulers and how they did in the draft. Let's start with Sam.
I thought they had a very interesting draft. They were actually the one team that didn't draft a specialist at all. They didn't draft a kicker or a punter. I honestly cannot remember the quarterback's name myself, even though I wrote up the whole list immediately following the the first round.
Kyle Loletta.
Okay. I should have known that. That's a former Eagles player. He spent some time on our practice squad.
Lack pizzazz. Is that a pizzazzy pick for the Maulers? The Maulers have a good fan base.
It would have helped more if Terry Bradshaw pronounced his name correctly.
Oh, I missed that. Was that in one of the call? I saw they had the celebrity call-ins. What did we think of? I saw we had Big E right for the Bandits. We had Terry Bradshaw. Any other celebrity cameos?
Terry Bradshaw's was really fun.
Bo Jackson was up on there.
I thought it was funny because
Drew Brees.
I thought it was funny because Terry Bradshaw, he mispronounced Kyle Lauletta's name, and he just he pretended to play it off. He's like, "Oh, well, I hope I said that right." And I was like, "Yeah, dude, you were just not prepared to say that, were you?" It was just really funny. I thought most of them were all right, though. It was cool. Michael Strahan, I thought was definitely cool that they got him. I'm forgetting a few of the others, but yeah, Drew Brees was pretty cool too. I liked it. It was definitely, again, something for the fans to engage with, I guess.
Yeah. How could you forget Kyle Moletta? Is that what we're calling him now? Kyle Moletta with the Maulers. I don't know if that's going to happen. Denzel says, what do you think? Who do you think QB1 will be for the Panthers? Right. We talked Shea, right? We have Shea versus Paxton Lynch. Mike Mitchell seems to think in his comments on the Twitter that that's really going to be a battle here going up. Sam, do we get your thoughts on the whole Shea versus Paxton debate?
I think that is going to be a battle. I don't want to say that the first pick of the USFL draft was necessarily staged or anything of that sort, but I think Jeff Fisher definitely picked Shea Patterson due to his Michigan ties. I think that he was trying to build a fan base and that he might have drafted due to connection over overall talent, ironically. Maybe I'm wrong in that sense, but it just feels like that he's trying to tap the Michigan fan base.
Oh, I think that's good. And what's surprising too is, Michigan is without a doubt, probably, I would say, the strongest in terms of the online community right now. Right. So it is good. First #1 draft pick with that. Right. It seems like that's a good pick. I like having that historically in the annals, right? That Shea Patterson was the #1 pick in the USFL draft. We have other questions here. Let me pop that out. Here you go. Jared says, when you have Fox Sports, they have connections. Getting some of those, but that was good. That was good. We didn't expect a lot. I think anything we got from the draft last night far surpassed anything we were looking forward to so far. He also says Paxton Lynch can't pass it all. Loves to run only. What do you guys think about some of the CFL guys jumping down? I said we're going to have Naylor on the show this week talking about it. It seemed like Farhan Lalji was especially salty that some of these CFL contracts weren't honored by the USFL with the Players' Jumping Ship. Evan, you write for CFL News Hub as well. What did you make of that?
Yeah, honestly, I thought it was a mixed bag. Shea Patterson was definitely surprising, and Paxton Lynch, both of whom we just talked about because they were in the CFL last year, I think, or Shea Patterson was on a practice squad. But anyway, yeah, I thought it was interesting. I didn't pick up at the time, the draft was happening, that some of those guys were from the CFL. It wasn't until I was looking later that I was like, oh yeah, that guy played here, and oh yeah, that's right, he was there last year or the year before. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, I definitely feel like there would have been more CFL players if the contracts had more flexibility, because a lot of those CFL guys, as much as they love playing up there, because I've talked to a lot of them, it is hard to, if you have family in the United States and traveling there between Canada all the time, it's sometimes not the easiest thing because it's farther away. So to sort of come back to the United States and play a similar game for similar money, I guess, that would probably be more beneficial for them. So yeah, I was surprised that there wasn't some big names from the CFL that were taken. But I guess that does have to do with the contract situation. Yeah.
I think this is the first step. I think a lot of people in the CFL this year are going to be obviously watching to see, right? Does the USFL maintain? Obviously, does it finish year one? Kyle, do you think, and we talked about this even yesterday, if the USFL is a viable spring alternative option, not having to go up north, what do you make of that? And obviously as well with fan control football, you want these places to be around so players have the options in the States.
Yeah. I'll answer this and then I got to run. Yep. I think always having football around the clock is the best thing for football. I think it's the #1 sport in America, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. It opens up new opportunities. I don't think any league opening up should try and be the NFL. I think the XFL set that foundation really well with not being the NFL. They had the kickoff. They had all these new rules. The FCF's doing the same thing. I think Indoor is going to stick around forever. I don't see how you could get rid of indoor football either. It's got its own cult following. I think the USFL is going to add to that. It's got the nostalgia factor from the 80s that, it's bringing back. I think if they can stick around long enough to add more teams from the 80s and other newer teams, I think that'll add a bigger, it'll increase their own fan base. It's something that I think the Canadian Football League should not view as Canadian Football League needs to get over itself in terms of we're better than the American counterpart. You guys are on the same level. You're your own thing. Be proud of your own thing. But America we're now starting to realize that football is global. And the more that we embrace that, and the more we stop trying to pit league against league and just recognize that it's football, and that's great for players everywhere, and that's great for fans everywhere, I think the easier it'll be. I don't think the CFL is going to go under anytime soon. I don't think any of these leagues threaten them. But I think that when CFL fans got really upsetty when they were talking about that Xfl Cfl merger, and I'm just if they merge, that doesn't mean that's not necessarily a bad thing. It didn't happen, but I think yes, they should compete for viewership because it's a competitive sport. No, they shouldn't compete in terms of football fans should you don't need to be loyal to a league. Love all the leagues. That's what makes them stay, and that's what makes football better is we get exposed more to more awesome players that we want to see win Super Bowls or Grey Cups and so on.
Yeah, I just hope that it exists and is a stable platform for other players. It just adds more fuel to the fire of the CFL, right? Where they say, "Wow, see, here's another. If they survive, if they make it." So, Kyle, thanks for hopping on. We'll let you go. We'll keep. If Sam wants to hit around, Evan and I are going to kind of ride this ship for a little bit longer. I'm going to post the comment in the chat. We did this yesterday. If you want to call in and keep it clean, we're welcoming some comments that way. But we had someone calling from the bathroom yesterday. That was interesting, but he did have good comments that way. Sam, to you, were there players? Were there players that you were expecting to see that you did not see drafted? And I'll pass it to Evan as well.
Yes, actually, I've got a bias on a couple different players. Mainly the tight end Calais Robertson. I really thought he was going to get drafted. I've been watching a lot of his hype videos, and maybe I just got caught up in what I saw on film, but I really, really thought he was going to be not only drafted, but be one of the first tight ends drafted. But unfortunately, we didn't hear his name called today. But outside of that, there weren't too many names. No, I mean, really. It seems like the vast majority of the guys that I noticed were recognizable names in or expected to be in the player pool. They pretty much got selected about where I would have expected.
We have a question. Well, Chris, we'll get your question in a minute. Evan, any other players you thought that you would see in the draft that you didn't see?
Yeah, there was definitely a few. Sam pointed out a great one, Calais Robertson. I definitely thought that given the tight ends that I knew were in the pool, it wasn't exactly the most plentiful position group there. It turned out that there were some good ones that I didn't know about, and props to those guys. But yeah, definitely thought that he was going to make it. And then there were two quarterbacks that I actually put this out on Twitter. I said there were two quarterbacks that I expected that were going to go not in the first round, but in the second round, and those were Roland Rivers and David Pindell. So Roland Rivers, he played at Slippery Rock, I think, which is it's a D2 school, I think. I'm not quite sure. He played at a D2 school. I know that. I forget if it's Slippery Rock or if it's something else. I get Slippery Rock and Stony Brook confused, but I think Stony Brook is D1. Anyway, Roland Rivers, he was really good in D2 a few years ago. He technically won the D2 Heisman, so I thought that he was going to be there. And the other guy, David Pindell, he played at UConn. UConn isn't exactly known for having the best football program, but I looked at some of his film, some of his stats over the years that he was there, and I definitely thought that he was kind of a lock for the USFL because he spent last season in the National Arena League with the Albany Empire. So yeah, I was kind of surprised that those two guys didn't go. I thought that maybe the other quarterbacks that went in the second round were a bit more surprising. There were a few there that I think maybe Rivers and Pindell could have replaced. But maybe they'll get picked up in the supplemental draft. We'll see. Those were the two main guys. So that I was like, they kind of surprised me when I looked at the list. There's a few others that I have that I can't think of off the top of my head. But overall, I mean, yeah, like Sam said, in terms of just like general guys in the draft pool, I feel like it was pretty acceptable and expected, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Jared has this comment too. Luis Perez was one that we tossed around a lot yesterday, expecting to see, along with David Pindell. Surprising that Luis Perez, I don't really know like what is next if you're Luis Perez, if you're not in the USFL. I mean, are we waiting for XFL next year? I mean, I don't see that. Maybe he's moving on, but that was one that we had tossed around a lot yesterday, along with Pindell, for high-profile quarterbacks that would potentially be in. Sam, thoughts on Pindell and on Luis Perez?
To be honest, I don't know much about Pindell. First time I had heard of him was yesterday, to be completely honest. As far as Perez, I am 100% shocked to see him not picked. He was another one of the players that I was surprised that wasn't picked, just because he kind of fits in these leagues so well. He's one of those guys that's made his rounds, and he definitely is one of those players that has the staying power in the spring league level. I think Kyle spoke on it yesterday about the tiers of different football and how there's, the NFL's top dog, and then there's CFL, and USFL is going to fall in a little bit below CFL, but basically right below it, and basically Perez is on that level where he's going to live in those leagues forever. So like you said, what's next for him if he's not in this league? It's kind of surprising to not see him on a roster.
Thank you all so much for that, alerting me that my banner had said pre-show the whole time. I hadn't updated our banner, our wonderful banner scrolling. Pindell, he's an FCF guy. Maybe he makes his way back to FCF. I mean, I was talking with Kyle. I know Kyle does work with FCF. They need to start announcing players soon as well. We're getting to that point where, if FCF is fielding 8 teams and they're going to have a quarterback and a backup quarterback as well, it is getting to the point where you're running into quality control issues there when you have the CFL, you have USFL, you have, FCF. And then now if you have XFL next year, I just don't know what that quarterback situation looks like, trying to incorporate in all those different players. Thoughts on that as well, Sam?
See, that's definitely where I see the competition lying. I see the FCF, USFL, and XFL as direct competitors for competition as far as player talent pool. As far as, like I said, CFL and NFL, I think they kind of have their own niches, so they're only really going to be losing the bottom end of their talent level, so it won't affect much. But yeah, I could definitely see a world where the FCF and the XFL and the USFL all existing, as well as potentially Major League Football if they ever get off the ground. Suddenly you got 4 different leagues competing for basically the same talent pool, which I know USFL said 3,000 players, but were they 3,000 players that were distributed through leagues already? So it becomes a big question of how much talent is there really to go around.
Chris, FCF said that they were going to increase their salary this year. It certainly couldn't have been worse than it was last year. I don't know if FCF is paying a competitive wage, especially with the USFL offering 45,000 with that. I mean, last year we had reported, FCF contracts were between $350 and $700 a week. So you figure that's, $2,800 a month tops, right? I mean, it is significantly lower than the USFL will be offering. Although I do believe that they probably pay for room and board, which the USFL is not. Evan, thoughts on that situation as well with the talent pool running out with FCF as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want me to compare sort of where I think the USFL is at with talent now that they've had their draft and where the FCF is with their talent, even though they haven't had a draft yet, just going off last year, I'd say that the USFL definitely, got some big names. We talked about Teamu. Another guy I think that we should talk about briefly is Kayvon Walker, who played in the XFL, was the XFL sacks leader for the New York Guardians. Guys like that who kind of have some credibility. FCF to me is more like, I don't want to say it's purely a developmental league like the spring league, but I definitely think that the talent there, it really varies. And I think, some of their players last year were more, sort of for public image. Like they brought in Josh Gordon and Johnny Manziel, all those guys. just to kind of get some publicity. And, you see the USFL, with Paxton Lynch and things like that. They drafted, the MLS guy too. That could, that could be newsworthy. I think generally speaking, the FCF, the guys that are in the FCF this year could probably make a run at the XFL or USFL in 2023, assuming that both of those leagues stay around. Maybe they go up to the CFL too. I don't know if the FCF will produce like many NFL players. They haven't yet. I know there's maybe like one or two guys that, made like an NFL practice squad from fan controlled football last year. But, I think for them, they're still kind of borderline developmental league, borderline professional league, whereas the USFL, based on, what they officially have now after the past 2 days, I would say that they're pretty, like, they're still kind of minor league professional, but compared to the XFL, I'd say that they're about there. They're like right, just under what the XFL had, in my opinion. And again, if, guys step in or step up, and make a name for themselves like they did in the XFL, well, then I'd say that both leagues are probably equal at that point.
Yeah, Jared was asking, the FCF field is approximately 50 yards long. It's a significantly, it's arena ball. We were talking yesterday, Quentin Flowers was basically overthrowing the field when he was playing. No Quentin Flowers sighting either. Some of these guys, we talked to Cardell Jones. I mean, we talked to a lot of these guys that didn't play in. I mean, it really did seem to me like a good mix of, getting some guys that are familiar with the system, right? Like a Brian Scott, and then getting some guys that have, a little bit of NFL experience. I know a friend of the show, Connor Folk, said his hot take was that this was a better quarterback room than the XFL had last year. Sam, what do you think about 2020 XFL quarterbacks versus this string of quarterbacks we saw drafted last night?
I would argue the XFL had a better class. I think the class kind of speaks for itself with the fact that PJ Walker, Taylor Heineke, a couple other guys stuck in the NFL. I mean, I know Jordan Teamu didn't last in the NFL, but he made it up there. They had a lot of guys jump straight from the XFL into the NFL, whether it was on a practice squad or an actual roster. And some guys actually even started games like PJ Walker and Heineke. So, I mean, if you're starting games at the NFL level, that's kind of what these other leagues are fighting for, right? They want the players that are going to be able to play and succeed at the NFL level, but they want them to stay in their leagues. Granted, the XFL never had that chance to succeed long enough to keep those players, but I think the USFL, until players prove themselves, like Evan spoke on, they are definitely looking up at the XFL currently. That's pretty much, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Evan. What do you make of that? I'm pulling up the list here just to refresh. If you're new here, if you didn't follow that, so we have PJ Walker, Jordan Teamu, Josh Johnson, Taylor Cornelius, Sharman Jones, and then who's not on the? That's only the top 5. So that would have been Matt, right? Matt. What was it? What was the Guardians? Matt McGloin. We had Matt McGloin on there. Quentin Flowers isn't, right? He was wide receiver. Who are the other 3 that aren't on this list? Of course, it doesn't have the whole top list.
Josh Johnson.
Oh, Brandon Silvers. We have Silvers on here.
Did you say BJ Daniels? Does that count? I forget if he started.
No, here we go. Okay, let's get Mark's article up here. Landry Jones. Let's never forget Landry Jones. See, man, this is like blast from the past. Cardell Jones, PJ Walker, Matt McGloin, Aaron Murray. Remember Aaron Murray?
That's right.
And then, never forget Brandon Silvers. RIP. Does he? Oh, wow. I was going to see if he still blocks me on Twitter. So, Evan, thoughts on the XFL quarterbacks versus the new USFL quarterbacks?
Yeah, well, I mean, just based on the guys that were drafted yesterday, I think a lot of them have the potential to be, kind of guys that we saw in the XFL because, I think about all the guys that came into the XFL that were on NFL practice squads before, and now we're sort of in a similar situation with these guys. I think about Kyle Laletta, Clayton Thorson, what's the other guy's name? Kyle Slaughter, Sloter. I think about those guys and kind of, comparing them to guys like PJ Walker, Jordan Teamu, all those guys from the original XFL class. I think, again, it's all about potential because we haven't seen any of them play yet. Generally speaking, I do think the XFL had a slightly better quarterback class because they were bringing a mix of guys that had already pro experience or already, or just some other just college experience or very basic pro experience. So I think, the USFL has done that too. They've got the spring league guys and then the guys that were in the NFL. So there's a wide variety there. But I mean, I think I'm just going to say this in terms of this debate. You have to understand, anybody that watched the XFL in 2020, if you saw PJ Walker, play, the PJ Walker to Cam Phillips connection is something that I'll never forget. And I think it's going to take a lot for the USFL to try and replicate that, just because, again, we haven't seen any of these guys play yet, so it's kind of hard for me to speak on that. But I think, PJ Walker was electric in the XFL, and, it's going to be hard. It's hard for me to picture somebody like, Shea Patterson or Brian Scott, even though I love him, it's hard for me to picture them in that position just because PJ Walker kind of already achieved that high. And, it's going to take a lot of just, talent that wasn't scouted before, I guess, to really put this thing together and make it seem like, a very strong and viable option that could really go up against the XFL. Because remember, if these two leagues stay around into next year, they will technically be competing against each other. So I think that's something important to keep in mind. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, Brett here. Brett is one of the moderators. We have the USFL, XFL Facebook group. Brett's a big XFL guy, but he said, there's a lot of talent in the USFL. I mean, maybe Brett, is feeling a little bullish on the USFL right now. Do you guys feel, there's obviously been frustrations lately with the XFL, right? We had the big NFL Xfl announcement on Monday that we're going to talk through on the show on Friday with Jay Noakes, among others. I'll probably get Dave Naylor's thoughts on that as well. If you guys are just tuning in, we're going to have Dave Naylor back on the show Friday. We're going to have Jay Noakes on the show from XFL and CFL News Hub. And then we're going to have AJ Jackie back with the Ottawa Red Blacks. Sam, are you feeling more bullish for spring football and the XFL, or do you think USFL really has their stuff together? Maybe we're set.
I'm not going to lie. Going into yesterday, I was thinking the USFL didn't quite know what they were doing. And then as the draft progressed, I began to realize what their plan may have been in the first place. With all of us hardcore fans out there trying to find every nugget of information or following the draft on various social media sites, USFL was like the hottest thing yesterday on every search engine anywhere you can look, whether it was Google, Facebook, Twitter, everywhere. People were looking for USFL news, and it was very evident. So maybe that was their whole plan behind the draft done the way it was. Personally, I think I still am super excited to see what the XFL has to offer, especially after the announcement that they have a partnership with the NFL. But I think there is a world where these two leagues can coexist, especially being that they're not necessarily playing in the exact same time slot. Honestly, like I said, I think USFL definitely raised their expectations after yesterday, but it remains to be seen what the XFL can do.
Yeah, I will say we're getting a lot more people hopping on here. This is good. Getting a lot more comments. Brett's commenting. We have Zach commenting. Zach, we'll talk about some more big takeaways here before we get out of here. I really wish this didn't cover all of Sam's beautiful face, the way that it kind of crops that there. I will say USFL looked really good yesterday. I know they paid a lot of money, right, to get those Twitter hash flags, right? If you typed in all in or whatever, you got a lot of that. I know that they paid, right, to be on the promoted search. One of our listeners, Harrison, did some research on that. Not cheap, right? It's $200,000, right, to be in that Twitter promoted search, whatever thing during the day if you had the USFL draft. I thought the USFL looked really, really, really good yesterday. I think a lot of the hesitation that people had the last, couple months, and why aren't we getting news and why aren't we getting all this stuff? I mean, clearly they wanted to get through the Super Bowl and then start, really dumping stuff out. I mean, you couldn't go anywhere yesterday without seeing USFL stuff online. Evan, what do you make of kind of the rollout and your thoughts on everything we've talked about the last couple of minutes?
Yeah, well, I mean, we touched on it at the beginning of the show. I'll give the USFL credit. Sure, they didn't, live stream the draft on TV or anything like that, but their graphic design people were quick to get things out, and I really like the celebrity introductions, things like that. Yeah, I mean, it was a lot better than I imagined it was going to go. I thought I would kind of have to, type something into Google and go to some obscure site to find all the picks. But it was pretty well set up. And I mean, of course, it didn't feel, as exciting as the NFL draft or anything like that. But, they were giving fans an insight into, the way that the picks were going. And, I saw today, they had a few videos of like the quarterbacks, putting the cards up or whatever for the selections. So I thought that was different. I thought it was unique. Again, a great way to sort of establish yourself and be original. And then again, yeah, specifically the picks. The talent pool was definitely a bit better than I thought it was going to be. I had a decent expectation. I had heard of some guys that were signing contracts that I talked to, and I was like, okay, well, they have NFL, XFL, CFL experience, so it's probably going to be, again, similar to what we saw in the XFL draft or the AAF draft going back 2 or 3 years ago. So I thought the overall talent pool was pretty good. There were some guys that I thought were going to get picked that didn't, and then there were some guys that, I just didn't think we're going to get picked, but did. So the opposite. But that's what makes it fun, right? And I definitely agree that like they were trying to wait until after the Super Bowl to just get everybody's attention and not try and slowly build something up, even if that made people nervous and everybody kind of went, oh, well, the whole thing's probably just going to fall through if they're not giving us information. I mean, the rollout has actually been pretty swift so far. So yeah, again, I think I said it before, but like I can't complain, and I'm still sort of tuned in and excited for what's going to happen in the coming months.
It is so interesting to me how reactionary we as spring football fans. And I mean, you have to remember, right? I mean, I do a podcast every week. I mean, we have to have stuff to talk about. So if the sentiment is like people are wanting news or whatever, I mean, we have to podcast every week. We're talking about it every week, but it is funny how, it could go from Monday, the NFL, XFL, and my God, this is going to, change the future, right? They're going to be working together. And then USFL draft comes out. It's like, man, the XFL doesn't know what they're talking about. We have all this stuff with the USFL. I mean, ultimately, you have a lot of really smart and talented people in a lot of these different things. In an ideal world, you will have both leagues succeeding, in slightly different times of the year, but encouraging players. I like seeing that talent war between the two leagues, and it's going to help drive up the price for these players. The best thing that ever happened to wrestling was the Monday Night Wars, when you had two competing factions on Monday night in two different, WWE or WWF at the time and WCW competing for talent and seeing players go back and forth. Wouldn't it be cool to see like Brian Scott have an all-star year and then jump to the XFL next year? I mean, I know that the USFL has some contract things in place to prevent that, but the worst thing that ever happened to wrestling was when WCW went away, because you lost that ability to have another option to go to, right? And Vince, when Vince came back in 2020, they didn't pay their players a lot because Vince said, who am I competing against? The AAF went out of business. I'm going to pay them what I want to pay them, and they have the option to play or they don't want to play. Sam, thoughts on player wage and everything like that with these two leagues coming out?
Yeah, actually, I thought it was a flaw in USFL's plan not allowing players to jump between the USFL and the XFL. I understand the thought process. They want to keep their stars as the faces of their league rather than allowing them to go and be a face of another league as well. But if you allow these players to double up on their wages by earning an XFL wage and a USFL wage, you're going to garner a better level of talent. And ironically, they're only going to be playing about 10 or maybe 18, 20 games tops. So you're looking at basically the length of an NFL season for these players. And then at the same time, they're earning double wages. So they're going to be more inclined to take USFL and XFL offers rather than go up to Canada, where they're going to miss out on the entire season for both these leagues.
Evan, thoughts about that? And then, we're at an hour. I'm happy to talk as long as people have questions. If either of you need to go, let me know. I'm happy to have callers come on as well. If anyone wants to call in, I can post the link again if anyone wants to come in and make a comment. I just don't want to keep you guys too long. Evan, thoughts on the competing landscape, right? People being able to bounce back and forth between the leagues or earning contract money that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, if these two leagues, USFL and XFL, are going to be competing against each other, it does make sense why they wouldn't want players, hopping from one to the other and kind of having that freedom. But I'll admit, there's something about these leagues and, establishing themselves as a true business that, I think maybe they haven't done well. I don't think the USFL has done an amazing job with that, specifically because of the sort of age restriction that they had in place during the draft. I kind of thought that was, a bit silly, to be honest, just because, like when you're trying to build out a platform and try and get players to, buy into your program, you don't have to put all these limitations on them and, where they came from, where they play. Like, just see what kind of guys you get, see what kind of interest you have, and then just go from there. I don't understand why it had to be so strict, at least from my opinion. Anyway, I think, the USFL and XFL, in terms of like which one is better, like right now, I mean, the XFL definitely has a competitive advantage because they announced this new partnership with the NFL. Probably one of the biggest things I think we've seen. That's one of the biggest things that we've seen in many, many years. So I just think that, like, these two leagues, if they end up going head to head, it'll be very interesting to see, which one ends up having the better product. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited for it. And then in terms of wages, just getting back to that specifically, I think, like, I thought it was fair. I think some guys would still want to stay in the NFL just to get paid a bit more. But obviously the difference between the NFL and like the USFL and XFL is like you're coming there to actually get playing time and not just sit on a practice squad for your entire career. Even if you're making a bit less money, it's probably still worth it because you want to seize that opportunity to actually, make plays and things of that nature, and plays that like actually count towards something, not just, preseason stuff. I watched the preseason. I don't have a problem with it, but I think for some players, it's just kind of, can we get through this and can I actually get on the team? So that's what these leagues are designed to do. And I'm just excited to see the type of people, that can get opportunities from them. And I hope that they last long enough that we can see them compete head to head, because to be honest, it's really been a long time. I don't know if we've ever seen that in sort of the spring football world where, like, I mean, obviously, there's like the TSL and FCF and stuff like that, but I'd say those are probably a tier lower than like, XFL, NFL, USFL, CFL, things like that. So yeah, it'll be interesting.
Sam, before we get out of here, and we'll get Evan too, we'll maybe round this show out. You were with Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, right? But heading into the USFL draft, has your thoughts changed? And let's talk through your team that you have going with now that we have the players selected heading into the season.
No, my thoughts have not changed. I am definitely riding with the Philadelphia Stars and Bart Andrews. In fact, actually, prior to the draft, I was going to roll with Philadelphia regardless of what happened because of my affiliation with the Eagles prior to this. But Andrews went and selected a really solid team, and I really like the fact that he was able to grab a couple players that know his scheme. I think that's going to be a huge advantage in year one. I literally cannot state how big of an advantage I think that's going to be for him. Ultimately, yeah, I'm still riding with them. I do have to say a couple teams definitely impressed me. I'm going to be slightly watching and following Todd Haley and Jordan Ta'amu in Tampa Bay. I think they've got an exciting team as well, and they'll be fun to watch. That's pretty much who my two teams right now.
Yeah, and we'll point out again, these are typos on the USFL graphics. These are not my graphics. I think having Bart, Coach Andrus, as like having done the spring league thing, having done the Team 9 thing, right? I think he has NFL Europe experience as well. I mean, I think that being crafty and wily, working on a short time frame that way, I think is going to be very beneficial. I think that is undersold how, you get these guys, maybe they haven't coached in a couple years, they're used to college, high money recruiting, right? You have all these people around. I think there's going to be a lot more work than maybe some of these coaches think. I mean, I understand we're calling this professional football. I know they had Skip Holtz on the Outkick 360 show heading into the draft yesterday talking like, well, I'm just ready to coach now. I'm done with recruiting and transfer portals and all that. I go, I think Skip might have a little bit more to do here in this league. I think you might be wearing a few more hats than you would in the professional league. Evan, who have you, any thoughts and change, and who are you going with heading into the season for the USFL?
Yeah, man, I'm definitely going to be rolling with Tampa Bay here. I was planning on going with them, before the season, just because I kind of like the, obviously there was the Bandits from back in the day. I kind of just like the whole culture that they had there. I watched the 30 for 30 on the original USFL, and Tampa was kind of the team that had a lot of swagger. So I was kind of like, I think I got to roll with them. And then I got really excited yesterday. Once they got Teamu and they started getting some other guys that went into today. I think they have one of the better rosters in the league, if not the best. Maybe I'm a bit biased, but I definitely think like they've got something good there. And I like Todd Haley. He's had some good NFL experience in Cleveland and in Pittsburgh, a few other places. I think he was in Kansas City too a while back. So I'm just excited to see them. Hopefully they'll be able to play in Tampa at some point. I like the area down there. I don't actually have any connection to it, but I've been there a few times and I like it a lot. So hopefully I can go down there and see a game at some point, maybe next year once they're out of the bubble. But no, I'm rolling with them, and I'm just kind of excited to see, how the season goes for them.
Oh, Sam's back. That's good. I didn't know if we lost Sam, if he had to jump out before we got out of here. We'll add Sam back in here. Like I said, guys, I'll let Evan or Sam go. I'll answer questions as long as you guys want. If you have questions in the comments, feel free to leave them, and then I'll get out of here in a little bit. Sam, anything else from you? You can get on with your day and head on.
Basically, if you guys don't mind, I wanted to plug my own channel. I apologize.
No, you've spent a lot of time with us the last 2 days. You're very well worth it.
I recently just started this channel. That's my only reason for plugging it, to be quite honest. I had never done anything like this up until basically January of this year. If it weren't for another YouTube channel, Gate City Sports, who covers the Eagles, actually, I probably would not be speaking with you guys today or writing for CFL News Hub for that matter. It's kind of always been a passion for me, and I'm lucky to be able to experience this with you guys and with several other great people that we're surrounded by in the XFL CFL News Hub group that we've got going on. Thanks for having me on, and I really appreciate it, and I hope I can join you guys in the future more often.
Sam, we appreciate it. I'll kick you out. We'll end up here with Evan. I really appreciate your time and spending the pre-show with us yesterday and the post-show today. We'll be reading your work over on CFL News Hub.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Evan, anything else? Any other big takeaways? I'll talk through my team again before we go. Any other big, broad takeaways? I think you've spent more time than anyone on the stream today. Here you thought you were just going to call in for a second. You get roped into this whole thing.
Yeah, I like I said, I've been studying the draft a lot the past 2 days, and it's kind of been an exciting time to see some guys that I've known and met and got to talk to. It's a nice moment to see them actually get another opportunity, because we've been waiting a while now. The XFL we haven't had for 2 years, so this is really the next big thing in my opinion. Like I said before, I'm just really excited to see where this whole thing goes. And obviously we have the supplemental draft on March 10th. So, we're not quite finished yet. But no, I mean, it's just a very good time. And I'm excited and just happy to be a part of this whole thing, getting to follow this, getting to cover this. And hopefully I get to work with the league more, as time goes on. I get to work with the players more. I get to meet more people that got drafted yesterday. Just excited to see where the road takes me, to be honest.
Yeah, Zach has this question so long, it takes up the whole screen. Long-time listener, Zach. Did the idea of the leagues merging to have best succeed? I already triggered itself the other day when the XFL announced the NFL partnership. Everyone knows the NFL has way more money. Evan, we didn't get your thoughts on this. We're going to get Jay's thoughts, Jay Noakes with CFL and XFL News Hub on the show on Friday. Your thoughts on the XFL CFL announcement from Monday, because you were not on the pre-show yesterday talking about that.
Yeah, so the XFL and NFL are having this collaboration, right? And that was, I mean, I woke up Monday morning and I was like, oh my God, this is huge. And I was just kind of, I was starting to think about it. The first thing that came to mind was like, oh, well, this is going to be, the XFL is now a feeder league for the NFL, but they were pretty quick to shut that whole thing down and say, no, this is not what we want. This is something separate. This is more for the health and the benefit of players. We're going to have more rules change and things like that. Just like a general collaboration of football operations is what my understanding of it was. Now, what I'd love to see, the NFL take away from the XFL or sort of really collaborate on, like a point of emphasis, would be, again, like the rules and the referees. because that's been a big problem, or a big deal in the NFL over the last few seasons. Really has been just sort of, some bad calls and, things like that. And then there's just some rules that, maybe need to be changed for the better of the game. And I personally, one of the reasons that I, love the XFL and loved watching it was because the rules were just so different and they made the game just better. Like one of the favorite things that, I saw in the XFL was the 3-point conversion, even though no team ever actually attempted one. Just the thought that like that could be a thing. And, that makes the sort of like, it makes a 1-possession game. Like you could have a wider deficit and it would still be a 1-possession game, if that makes sense. I think certain things like that could be tried out in the NFL. And if it doesn't work, they can always change it. But just to know that the NFL has maybe, looked at the XFL, like to see, what exactly they were doing in 2020 and what exactly they were making changes to, the fact that the NFL is maybe learning and taking away something from that, I think that's huge. And I would definitely like to see more development with that more than anything.
I just hope that they're able to maintain their own identity. I know that was the feedback that was given a lot in the Facebook groups. I know that Brett and I are part of, is the true XFL and USFL fans on Facebook. Brett, I'll shout that out. I just think that you want the XFL to have its own identity. And I don't want it to be like the little brother or sister to the NFL. Like, well, let's pass this rule along there, or let's let them try this out, or let's let them try that out. I mean, that certainly speaks to their longevity plans, right? To have the league exist for years and years, to be able to test a multitude of things. I mean, when the spring league was involved in the XFL, it's much easier to test a rule over, a 3 or 4 week kind of spring league training camp bubble season than it is over a season of the XFL, right? I mean, the rules would have to be in place for the full season to kind of maintain, maintain integrity, right? I mean, this isn't fan control football, for crying out loud, right? We need to be able to have some modicum of success, of stability. But that's what I'm afraid of. I know that I've had mixed, right? Because like Mike Mitchell obviously thinks this is the best thing in the world. Very, very excited for it. Like one of our listeners, Seth, I talked to a lot online. It's like, well, are we getting XFL games on the NFL Network? Is that really the biggest deal? Is that not the biggest deal? I don't know. So I hope it is good. It couldn't hurt being, holding hands with the NFL and all that stuff, but it is tough. I just want them to maintain their own identity. And I don't know how you do that, being literally what they call it, the Petri dish for the XFL. It just seems odd.
I agree. No, I mean, yes, the XFL and NFL collaboration is definitely good on some levels, but at the same time, like you said, it's a great point about maintaining identity, and you don't want to get caught up in sort of the business aspect of things as much as you want to be, a good league and an established league with, a nice fan base and everything like that. It would be a shame if the XFL were to just become, a second version of the NFL, because the XFL was interesting because it was always unique. I mean, I mentioned all those rule changes before and things like that, and that's what I always admired about the XFL, was that it was football, but it sort of took away the stuff that people had a problem with in the NFL and then kind of put a new spin on it. And it was still, I mean, yes, the audiences were smaller. You could say that the talent wasn't as great. You can say all these things, but at the end of the day, it still happened. It was going well up until the pandemic, but we got a solid 5-game, look at, what this could be in the future. And I think it definitely is something viable, especially now under new ownership. I'm excited to see where it goes. I just hope that they stay careful at the same time, like you said.
Yeah, Jared has a good point here. I don't want to see the rule changes for every year for the XFL because the NFL wants it. It could ruin gameplay. I mean, it is. At that point, you are venturing into fan control football territory, right? Like, oh, we're going to try a new overtime format this year. Okay, we're going to try a new conversion format this year. So I think we are good. We had one comment. They appreciate the live shows. Jared, I think we're going to be doing more live shows here in the future. I think there's going to be some changes coming up to the Markcast. Please, if you are interested in any of this nonsense, please like and subscribe. You can read Evan's content over at CFL News Hub and XFL News Hub, but please like and subscribe to the channel. We have a big show coming up Friday. I have Dave Naylor coming on. I want to get Dave Naylor's thoughts, big CFL insider on a lot of the CFL talent, moving down to the USFL and kind of his thoughts on the contract stuff. I'm sure Dave will also have a lot to say about the XFL NFL thing. I know that Dave and I went back and forth on Twitter about The Rock being involved in the Super Bowl and them having a connection to nod. And now, of course, I look like the big dummy and Dave looks like the genius that he is. We also have AJ Jackieback from the Red Blacks coming on. We have Jay Noakes from XFL and CFL News Hub coming on to talk as well. We haven't heard from Jay on the podcast in probably a year and a half. And then I have a special Calgary Stampeder player we're going to be announcing tomorrow that's going to be coming on the show as well. Evan, anything else that you would like to say before we let everyone go?
Not too much, man. I mean, we've covered a lot here in the past hour and a bit. Again, I'm just, I'm happy that this draft actually happened because there was a while where I was kind of skeptical that, they were talking about this, thing. And I was like, yeah, you're really going to do it. There's all this media buzz. Sure. But, it kind of seems a bit sketchy, but, yesterday happened and today happened. And, I feel a bit more confident now. So hopefully, moving into the coming months, March, and especially April, once the play actually starts, we'll see some good spring football again because, I'm not going to criticize the FCF or TSL or anything like that or any of the indoor leagues because I do think that those are, very viable and very good places to play football. But this to me seems like, again, the biggest thing we've had here since the XFL. And look, obviously the CFL had their, first season back from COVID last year. But what I've learned is that, Americans don't really tune in, to Canadian football because, it's not aired here. It's just not, people aren't as familiar. But with a thing like the USFL, again, very similar to the XFL where you have, 8 teams and 8 cities and it's in the spring, it is a bit different. There are some, little things that separate the two. And again, we had that whole conversation about, what's different between the XFL and the USFL, what's the same. But right now the focus is the USFL. XFL's announced their stuff, but they're not going to be back for another year. So right now my attention's on this, my attention's on the players, and my attention is really on, where this can go and what the ceiling is. So again, just an exciting time. Happy to be a part of it, and I'll just see what happens.
Yeah, Chris, thank you for pointing out. I don't look like a dummy. A football maybe, but not a dummy. Thank you, Chris. I think USFL made a lot of good strides yesterday. I know I've gone back and forth with a lot of our listeners online and off about that. I think that this is exciting. I want it to be a success. When people came at me and they're like, you're being too negative, you're not being negative. I criticize because we want change, right? I have to think that the fan backlash for this lack of, USFL stream and all of that, did that help them, incentivize them to do more coverage? I don't know. Did it hurt? It certainly did not. I think you need to let your voice heard. And I think that criticism is a good way to enact change, especially when it's from people that know what they're talking about, like spring football fans, right? I mean, not just me, but I think we are passionate about this. I wish that they did more in terms of listening to some of those, ideas and suggestions, but I think that the USFL definitely has their, vision going forward. I feel better about it this week than I did last week. And I feel better about it last week than I did the week before. So that's really all we can ask. Last things for me, I think and I said at the top of the show, officially a Philadelphia Stars fan with a friend of the show, Brian Scott and Matt Mangle coming on. I could not be happier for them. Bug Howard, a lot of the guys on that team, this is why we do the podcast, is for those connections. Brian Scott, I'll never forget him taking the time out of his day after winning the, what was the first spring league champ? It wasn't the Mega Bowl, Evan. What was the first? It was the Brian Woods Trophy. What was the original spring league trophy?
Oh man, I don't remember. I know that he won it in 2018 and 2019. That's all I know, but I don't know the name.
I think it was just the spring league championship because we have here.
I think it was. I mean, it was like an MVP or something that I know he won twice, and then I know he was a champion too. But yeah, I can't remember a specific name.
Yeah, no, I think it was just the Spring League 2020 championship, and then he won the MVP as well. But I'll never forget that Brian taking time out of his day. Brian Woods got Brian Woods too, but Brian Scott has a friend in me for life. I'm going to support them and the team. And I really appreciate everyone stepping in today. Make sure you leave your comments, who you think won the draft. Brett says Generals won the draft. And, TSL Championship. And for God, please, like and subscribe. Check this out. Going to have another big show on Friday. Evan, I think that is it. I'm going to play the outro music here, and I think we'll get out of here. How do I get this away? There we go. And I appreciate everyone's time. Thanks again.